joining us today, and we have a lot of the bay-friendly plants that are out there that can work as an alternative for a lawn. So I'm going to ask just how many of you heard about bay-friendly? A couple of you? Oh, good. Bay-friendly, it's a local coalition. Make sure, signing the book. Got it. Bay-friendly is a coalition of people of agencies around the bay that started quite a few years ago. And it was based originally on trying to reduce the amount of green material that went into landfill. It's really expanded beyond that. And the book that you have in front of you, which is Bay-Friendly Gardening, because this was originally started from waste management agencies who aren't necessarily gardening experts. But what they did was they actually approached people throughout the entire industry in this area and came together with what they considered to be really strong basic principles. And if you look on page 10, it outlines, this is an excellent book, by the way. I think it's really user-friendly, good accessible information. You're not overwhelmed with vocabulary that you have to be in botany to understand. But so they came up with really strong, essential bay-friendly practices that are really just good gardening practices. Building healthy soil, reducing the waste stream, and that in part has a lot to do with choosing plant material that doesn't get too large for the area. You've all seen the photinia hedges that are put in places where they're 18 feet tall and they have to be pruned with people on ladders with extension chainsaws, which is too big a plant put in too small a space. And then you've got a constant pruning thing that has to go on. We want people to be conserving water, which in this year certainly seems highly appropriate. We're looking at creating wildlife habitat, protecting local watersheds in the bay by the use of plant material that does not need heavy uses of pesticides. Mike is probably in his office.
What do you think, you put it off?
We have also one of the bay-friendly values is contributing to a healthy community. And that has a lot to do with, again, reducing pesticide use, reducing water use, making sure outdoor lighting is appropriate for an area. I mean, there have been, for a while we had extremely, landscape lighting that was too bright. That actually disrupted both plant diurnal cycles, but also insect and animal cycles. So choosing appropriate lighting. So those are all parts of being a good neighbor, a good community member. We have hazards in there. We're talking about saving energy, smart placement of plants, so that you are providing shade, you're providing windbreaks. For those of you who are in permaculture class, strong sense of values here. So those are the bay-friendly principles that really came out of the coalition, came out of the different agencies that were involved in Bay-Friendly. Bay-Friendly now provides workshops and talks throughout the Bay Area, from Sonoma, Marin, down throughout the South Bay. I don't know if we go into Monterey area.
County, I think that's surf-friendly.
Surf-friendly.
And there's river-friendly, and they're
In
all
Sacramento.
basically the same principles.
So good resources in here. I really recommend that you take the time to go through this. It's a really good handy. There's a common plants for Bay Area communities. It's a really good list to start with. We have identified as much as possible the bay-friendly plants on the nursery floor, and they should be flagged with yellow flags with black dots. So those should all be plants that are considered to be bay-friendly, meaning they don't produce a lot of organic waste. They don't take a lot of water. They don't take a lot of pesticides to operate. The agenda a little bit on the way we used to do this, and what I'm going to talk about next is sheet mulching. How many of you have sheet mulch? And I know, anybody else have any experience sheet mulching? This is the least expensive, most effective way of getting rid of turf. So if you're in an area where you have lawn that you just, in this day and age, you want to get rid of the lawn, we used to say if you want to get rid of lawn, you need to come in with a sod cutter, cut down all that sod, have it hauled away into the dump. It's actually a complete waste of resources if you do that. There's no reason why the root material and the grass material on the lawn cannot become components of healthy soil. So having it hauled away, you've got carbon footprint for hauling, you have the carbon footprint for running the sod cutters, you have the trash stream that's built up with that, and it's expensive. It's an expensive alternative. So what we do with sheet mulching, and this is the bay-friendly approach towards sheet mulching. This is not, if you go Google sheet mulching, you are going to find it's a little bit like making lasagna. There are going to be 85 different recipes for sheet mulching. The bay-friendly method is what I'll talk about, and then I'm going to tell you my own recipe for doing this because mine's a little bit different. So when you're sheet mulching, what you have is this. Don't you love this lawn? This is the demo lawn I was given. By the way, this actually is a really good opportunity for me to talk about plastic turf or artificial turf. I know people who put down artificial turf in preschools, and they have to go out and bleach it every day. Because when you have this artificial turf, what happens is bacteria, and kids dribble all the time. So anything like that, if you have this in an area where there are dogs or cats, anything that comes down in here doesn't biodegrade, isn't broken down by bacteria and fungi. So you literally have to go bleach it to get it clean. So it's a petri dish. I am, needless to say, not very enthusiastic about using artificial turf. I think there are a lot of reasons why. I mean, it sounds great. You put your lawn, put down something fake green that's going to look okay and pretend it's all right. Anyway, I would get off the class. I'm not supposed to do an artificial turf bash as part of the talk. But, so if you have your lawn, the step number one for doing sheet mulching is just mow it as close as possible. You do not need to pick up the grass clippings. I don't care if there are weeds in there. That's not an issue. You simply want to scalp the lawn. So you do the opposite of what you do when we've been preaching to the choir forever, mow your lawn high, mow your lawn high. We don't want you to mow it high now. You can, however, also go buy sheets of cardboard that are just ready to lay out. If you're going to use cardboard boxes, they're free. Furniture stores are terrific for picking them up. You can get really big ones. It's hard to do lots and lots and lots of little boxes because one of the things you want to make really, really sure is that you never have a crack like this uncovering the ground, because what we're doing is we're blocking the efficacy of the sheet mulching is because you are completely obliterating light from getting to the soil surface. Virtually all weeds are light obligatory. The seeds will not germinate unless light is hitting the seed. So what we're doing with this is you're shearing back your lawn, you're putting your cardboard on top of that, and the cardboard you need to make sure that you've got at least a 6 to 8 inch overlap any place you've got a crevice. This is why some people love to do the rolls that you buy, because it's much less patching. If you are in a windy day and you're doing this, wet it down as you go so that it doesn't decide to take off for the bay. So having your cardboard is easier in that respect. So, and then what you're going to do on top of this, if you are planning on planting something in this fairly soon, you would want to take compost. We happen to have beautiful compost out here. And you want to put down a good layer of compost. Now this is if you want to sheet mulch and plant within like a month or two, or right away. You can't even do it right away. So you want to have your compost go on top of your cardboard. So again, one, cut short, cardboard, wet cardboard, compost, and then on top of the compost, you're going to do, according to bay-friendly practices, 3 inches of mulch. Now, how much is 3 inches? Those are your fingers. I can't tell you how many yards I go to where they put down the mulch and it's this thick. Again, the goal with this is that there are a couple of things that you're trying to achieve here. One is that you want it to look nice. You do not want this to be an unsightly thing, especially if you're doing this in a front yard. The other factor is that if this is fresh tree mulch, which is just the free stuff that the arborists will drop off, you're going to have green material in here. It's going to break down. So you want to have at least 3 inches because it's going to break down even more. So once you've got your mowed lawn, cardboard, wet, compost, mulch, if you want to plant directly into this, you can simply pull the mulch aside and plant a 4-inch pot right on that. and pull the mulch back around it a little bit. You don't want to have the mulch coming right up next to the neck of the plant, or it can get too wet and you have too much moisture there. You can plant right away when you're doing sheet mulching. Yes.
So you don't cut a hole in the cardboard then?
If you're doing 4-inch plants, you don't have to. If you're doing 1 gallons, you absolutely have to.
Okay.
Now that's the bay friendly. That's the bay friendly, and again, that's what's in your book. That's what you're going to find. If you're going to do this again, if you Google this, you're going to find 60 different ways to do sheet mulching. I happen to live in Walnut Creek, and I happen to live on very heavy clay soil, and I bought a home that was a ½ acre of Bermuda grass. Bermuda grass is one of the most tenacious plants on the face of the planet. The end of the world, I don't care what we do, there'll be cockroaches and Bermuda grass. There is, and so it is resistant. It is resistant to glyphosate and Roundup. I'm an organic grower. I do not use pesticides. I haven't ever. I ran a landscape maintenance business for a long time. It was an organic landscape business in Berkeley and Oakland. It was 30 years ago, but even then there was an absolute market for people who were not using pesticides. So I buy a house with a ½ acre of Bermuda grass on heavy clay. Now, Bermuda grass roots down deeper than our oak trees do. So it has these amazing roots that go really deep. If you try to pull it out, it breaks off at every node, and every node has enough resources, carbohydrate resources in that root to stick up new growth. Even if you do Roundup on Bermuda grass, the best you're going to get, and this is according to Dr. Ali Hanavandi, who is the turf specialist for Northern California, who I worked with for years, the best you can do is 3 years. Because you're not going to get everything down deep, and there will be, and it seeds. So you have Bermuda grass seeds blowing in from, because everybody's got Bermuda grass out here, and you've got rhizomes in the soil that are going to punch up. Okay, so I'm an organic gardener. I'm not going to spray Roundup. I've been living with this for 30 years. I'm going to tell you, sheet mulching is the best, least effort way I have found to deal with Bermuda grass. And I have tried everything, including soaking the soil and getting out my deep weeders and turning everything over gently to 18 inches and trying to sift through the soil to get, oh, forget it, who's got time for that? My knees won't let me do it anymore anyway. So this is the answer as far as I'm concerned. Now this isn't a one-time deal, and I don't do compost. Right, when I'm doing weed control, if I'm doing trying to kill the Bermuda grass, I shear everything down to the ground so there's nothing photosynthesizing above ground. I put down 4 layers of cardboard, and then I do 6 to 10 inches of chipper trash, this mulch on top of it. No compost. No compost. If I wait, that is what happens with this, is I have now fed, this is high carbon, this is high carbon. There's very little nitrogen in here. So what I have done now is feed the bacteria, oh, I get it wet, by the way. I still do that, getting it wet, because bacteria and fungi need moisture to operate. So if I have wet cardboard, cardboard is wet, the mulch is on top of that. The bacteria, do I inoculate it with anything? I don't have to. The bacteria and the fungi are ubiquitous, they are always here. So just by putting this out here, I've created a buffet for the organisms that break down carbon. So they are, I just give them a meal of carbon. Well, as they're breaking this down and there's no light getting to the soil surface, they also break down the Bermuda grass roots that are on there, close to the top. Yes?
Is there any good season to do this?
You can do sheet mulching any time of the year. I find it personally most effective to do in spring and fall. Because we have a year-round growing season here. Right now, the summer weeds, the winter weeds are dying. The summer weeds are just beginning to come up. They're small, but they're coming up in the yard. So if I do it in the fall, I can knock back the winter weeds. If I do it in the spring, I can catch the summer weeds as they're starting to come up. And again, if I do this, the weed seeds that are on the soil surface I'm not going to be pulling this up. I do find in areas that if it was a solid Bermuda grass area, I'm going to have to come back and sheet mulch it. So I would do this year when we're in drought. I would sheet mulch and just let it be. I would use your water to save you the trees that you love. have there be a raised bed where you're growing the 5 tomatoes you're going to be able to water this year. By the way, the restrictions on water that they're talking about, we have 3 cities in California that have said you cannot use potable water outside. That hasn't happened to us yet around here. But East Bay Mud and Contra Costa Water are both doing rebates and can get rid of lawn. And they're talking about restricting outdoor water use. Those restrictions will not apply for edible plants. And I don't know how they're going to ground truth that, but they're saying that for edible plants, they're not going to have the restriction. So, but if I were doing the sheet mulching now, which is it looks great. This looks really attractive as long as you've actually covered up all of the cardboard. If you have that heavy Bermuda grass, one of the things you want to be very aware of is as you come near any kind of a sidewalk or a driveway, you're going to want to trench down at least 8 inches and wrap the edge of the cardboard over, bend that down into that, and fill that then with mulch. Because if you've got Bermuda grass, the roots are living underneath the sidewalk or the driveway. So as soon as if you just leave it just sheet mulched up to the top, the Bermuda grass is going to come back and you're going to have a little green fringe that's going to move all the way around. By digging the trench down and filling that with wood chips, it will try and come in, but when you go to pull it out, it's like unzipping a feed bag. And it comes right out, and you can get more, and you have to do it. You're either going to use glyphosate and try and spray it, ineffective for the most part. It'll kill it, but it only kills it back to one node. So then it just punches right back out again. Bermuda grass is really good at blocking off the glyphosate moving through, so it doesn't translocate all the way down to the end of the root system. So it's again, what you're looking for, especially if you're doing somebody else's place, so if you're landscaping for somebody else and you're getting rid of a Bermuda grass lawn, trench around your hardscape so that you've got an easy way of, and more on the client. You are going to need to do hand control on the Bermuda grass when it comes back from underneath your sidewalks and your driveway. But it's going to be not a huge issue. If you just put your cardboard right next to the edge of the hardscape and mulched on top of that, then the Bermuda grass is going to come under. It's going to be much more difficult. It's going to be much harder to get it out. So doing that little trench around makes life a whole lot easier. So this works really effectively, and I have seen gardens where they basically sheet mulch, put the compost down, put the 4-inch plants in, did inline emitters. So actually, people who are doing that often would have a inline irrigation system. So they do turf, cardboard, compost, inline emitters, mulch. And you're going to do that. You want to flag where your inline emitters pipes are so that you don't chop through it when you're going to plant your plants. It's a good idea to flag where and I've seen yards where people do the sheet mulching, flag where their plants are going to be, and they wait 6 months before doing their planting. To the yard a little, I would do, if you're going to do that, pick really pretty flags. Yes?
Is the only difference between, let's call it arborist mulch versus mulch from a landscape supply place, is the only difference its consistency, as far as it looks more consistent from a landscape supply place, but the function is the same?
Mulch simply applies to basically anything you put on top of the ground. I would not do a rock mulch for this, because I am looking at feeding the bacteria and the fungi that break things down. So if you were to do cardboard and a rock mulch, you're not feeding those bacteria and fungi. If you were to use something like 1/4-inch fir and redwood both have terpenoids, which are oils that are found within the bark of those trees. Those terpenoids inhibit fungal growth. So one of the reasons to buy those mulches and put them down is they're there much longer. This is chipper trash. This is what's called tree mulch. It's going to break down quickly. But I want it to break down quickly, because what's breaking it down are the fungi and bacteria that are then destroying the weed roots that are underneath that cardboard as well. So I'm really looking at feeding a very specific microbial community with this. So if you did cocoa bean hulls, which is the caviar and champagne of mulches, it's lovely. Your garden smells like chocolate. They get mildewy here, so they get that whitish cast on them, which is I don't think is the least bit attractive. And you also can't have that any place where dogs are going to come in, because the theobromides in the cocoa bean hulls are toxic to dogs. And the last thing you want is somebody visiting you with their pet poodle and and dogs love the taste of chocolate. So it's not a good survival technique, but they love the taste of chocolate. So you can pay for mulches that will do the same thing much more slowly. Again, almost all the ones that last a long time, like the fir, the redwood. You've got the nitrogen-treated mulches. What am I missing, Allison?
There are a number of companies now who take arbor mulches from arborists and break them down, and then they screen them.
Right.
And so you've got small, medium, and large, and then frequently they're tinted. But the small, medium, and large are basically the same thing with more handling and therefore more expensive.
Right.
And a lot of the fresh material that is going to help break it down quickly is not included in that, even though it's arbor mulch.
So I mean, when I'm doing this, a part of my goal tends to be I want to keep material on site. So I will often stockpile the materials for sheet mulching until somebody in my neighborhood has a tree taken down. And then I go knock on the window of the truck and say, you want to dump the chips in my driveway? You have to be willing to shovel 40 yards of chips over a short period of time quickly. But it means that I've got my cardboard, so I wait until it's in my neighborhood. You can't do that realistically if you're working in somebody else's yard. But in your own yard, you can set up that kind of a thing.
How worried about disease do you have to be, like if the tree was sick?
It's an excellent question, and what I'll tell you is that if we take one disease, there are a couple. There are several diseases that are able to be vectored by the chips, none of them locally. There's one in Southern California. So in Southern California, there's a fungus on pine trees that can be vectored by mulch. The worst tree disease we have here is sudden oak death, which is Phytophthora ramorum. And then it goes to a whole host of plants, but it kills our native oak trees. Not all of them, but one subset of the native oaks die. And it's an airborne pathogen. So you'd think, oh my, if you're shredding up this tree, you're blowing it into the air. Well, the way you can find out if the Phytophthora ramorum, which is the name of the organism, the way you can find out whether it's alive is with pears. And we baited chipper trash. We baited the tree mulch from trees that we know, and they tested positive in the lab. They had died from Phytophthora ramorum. We grind them up, we put the pears in there. We're not finding any live organisms. Now, think about this logically. This is an organism that lives inside the cambium of the trees. So it lives underneath the bark. It lives underneath the bark in a closed system. So when you shred that and open, here everything is exposed to oxygen. Oxygen can be fatal for organisms that need to live in a closed system. You ever had an infection that was something that got under your skin and it's growing there, and you open it up and it's exposed to the air and it heals? The same kind of thing, I think, for a lot of tree diseases. They're inside the tree, they can live there, but once you expose them to the air and oxygen by putting them through a shredder, they simply are not found within like 24 to 48 hours. So for me, it's a non-issue, except for one thing. I will not accept walnut. And that's because walnut carries a chemical in it called juglone, Juglone, and juglone is a very effective growth inhibitor. If Monsanto can ever duplicate juglone, Roundup will be off the market. So you can, the real important thing to know about this is if you go into a garden to work on it and there's a walnut tree there that's been there for a long time, you have a very small plant portfolio of things that you can grow underneath there. So it can really, and I have had a couple of places that I have designed and done over the years where there was, in the East Bay, where there's a beautiful English walnut tree shading the backyard, and they're like, you're the third designer I've hired to come in here, everything they planted died, and I'm like, did nobody talk to you about your walnut tree? And I said, I can't give you a design of plants that are going to thrive underneath your lawn. Here they got azaleas, rhododendrons, pieris, lovely, all those lovely shade things that just won't make it under a walnut tree. Yes?
When does the Phytophthora become airborne?
Phytophthora when does it become? When it sporulates off the leaf.
Okay.
So if you are looking at the leaf of, say, here's your basic bay leaf. And I say bay because Umbellularia californica, the California bay, is the #1 host for Phytophthora ramorum. It does not kill the bay. What it does is it makes a little yellow, pretend this is yellow, makes a little yellow spot with a little black ring around it on the leaf. And it looks like it's completely fine, but the pathogen is in there and sporulating, and those spores then will blow in the wind. They can get onto the bark of live oak, Crocus agrifolia, and they are able to penetrate through live oak. There doesn't need to be a wound. They're able to move through the bark and start to grow inside. We call this disease sudden oak death, which is a complete misnomer because it doesn't happen suddenly. It's growing there underneath the bark of the tree probably for 3 to 5 years before we see any symptoms. But by that time, you have a pathogen that may have almost completely burned the tree. And there are other organisms that know there are ways of, there's some signs and symptoms of trees that are dying of sudden oak death. There's a hypoxylin fungi that emerges off of the trunk. There's a bark beetle, you see the frass on the outside. So the fungi and the insects know it's a dead tree, although we can't see that. So, by the time, if I see those two things and you maybe sample the tree and tell somebody you need to take this tree out, it's going to fail. But this is, again, the host plant for this is primarily California day. Also can be found, the host other plants are rhododendrons, azaleas, camellias, poor Monrovia, which is a great nursery, by the way, expensive, but a great nursery. Monrovia, when this first was being discovered, shipped infected camellias all over the United States and had to pay to get all of those plants back. It cost them a fortune.
Would those plants that you just mentioned, the camellias, azaleas, rhododendrons, show the same signs and symptoms?
Yellow dot with a black halo around it on the leaves. There's actually a website that shows you the signs and the symptoms. One of the things, if you are buying plants, that you really want to look for, especially if you're putting them in somebody else's yard, you'd really like to know that you're not, you're working in Orinda, Moraga, Lafayette. I mean, if I talk to Aurora, likes fog, it likes cooler temperatures. So it's been devastating up and down the California coastline. Further south, you get around San Luis Obispo, it's not so bad. But it's already in Oregon and Washington now.